Hello, today I will tell you how the faucet broke in my house, what I saw when the plumber came turned my life around. Watch to the end if you want to know what happened. It was a Saturday morning like any other, or at least it seemed that way. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across our bedroom. The faint smell of coffee wafted up from the kitchen below, a scent I'd come to associate with stability, routine, and Beth, my wife. But that morning, I woke up to a quiet house. Too quiet. The soft hum of the coffee machine was absent, and the rhythmic clatter of plates being arranged on the counter was nowhere to be heard. Beth, who usually sang off-key to old jazz standards, wasn't humming her usual tunes. Something felt off. Pulling on my robe, I shuffled downstairs to find her in the living room. She was perched on the couch, legs crossed, her phone cradled in her hand. Her expression was distant, a mix of focus and amusement, as though she were texting a friend. But as I approached, she startled, quickly locking the screen. "Morning," I greeted her, my tone cautious. "You're up early." Beth offered a small smile, too quick, too tight. "Just catching up on some messages." "Everything okay?" "Fine," she said. "Just a busy day ahead. We're getting the bathroom fixed, remember?" "Ah, yes. The bathroom. Our ensuite had sprung a leak earlier that week. Beth had been the one to handle everything, calling the plumber, scheduling the repair. I hadn't thought much of it, trusting her to sort it out. She always took charge of the small domestic problems, and I was happy to let her. I nodded, pouring myself a cup of coffee and taking a sip. "When's the plumber coming?" "Soon," she replied, a little too quickly. "He'll be here around 10. I'll handle it, you don't need to worry." Something in her tone made me glance at her. She was fidgeting with the hem of her sweater, avoiding my eyes. It wasn't like Beth to act nervous, she was usually so self-assured. But I brushed it off. Maybe she was just anxious about the house repairs. Or maybe I was reading too much into it. As the hours passed, I tried to distract myself with errands, but the strange feeling lingered. When I returned home that afternoon, the house was immaculate. The faint scent of bleach hung in the air, and the bathroom sparkled like new. But Beth was nowhere to be found. I called out her name, my voice echoing through the halls. A moment later, she emerged from the kitchen, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly tousled. "Where were you?" I asked, my tone more curious than accusatory. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "Just cleaning up after the plumber left. Everything's fixed now." "Good," I said, though her answer felt oddly rehearsed. That night, as I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling, the quiet nagging in the back of my mind grew louder. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to find out. The following day, I woke up earlier than usual, the remnants of an uneasy sleep clinging to me like cobwebs. Beth was already up and bustling around the house. She was wearing her favorite yellow sundress, the one she only brought out for special occasions. The sight of her humming to herself, carefree and radiant, only deepened my confusion. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in our home, as though the air itself carried a secret it refused to share. Over breakfast, I probed gently. "How's the bathroom holding up?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "Perfectly," Beth replied with a broad smile. "The plumber did a great job. No leaks, no fuss." Her cheerfulness struck a dissonant chord. Beth was rarely this animated over mundane house repairs. "Did you tip him?" Her hand paused midway to her mouth, her forkful of eggs hovering. "Of course," she said after a moment, her tone light but overly deliberate. "He earned it." I nodded but felt no relief. Something wasn't adding up. Later that morning, while Beth was out shopping, I found myself wandering into the bathroom, examining the pristine tiles and polished fixtures. The plumber, whoever he was, had indeed done a meticulous job. But as I knelt near the baseboards, my gaze fell upon a small scratch on the floor, a mark that hadn't been there before. It wasn't the scratch itself that caught my attention, it was what it symbolized. An imperfection in an otherwise flawless facade. A crack in the foundation. I shook my head, chastising myself for being overly suspicious. People scratched floors all the time. Yet, as I stood, my eyes landed on the bathroom mirror. Beth had written something in the condensation on the glass, a habit of hers when stepping out of the shower. The faint outlines of her words remained, and as I leaned closer, I made out a single word: thanks. Thanks. Beth wasn't the sort of person who wrote thank yous to herself. The word lingered in my mind like a splinter. It felt personal, intimate, like something you'd leave for someone who mattered. I left the bathroom, brushing the unease aside, and went about my day. But the word followed me everywhere, echoing in my thoughts, growing louder with every passing hour. By the time Beth returned home, I had convinced myself I was imagining things. I even laughed at the absurdity of it all. Beth was my wife. We had built a life together, a family. She wouldn't jeopardize that over something trivial. Still, when she walked through the door, I couldn't help but notice the way her smile faltered for just a moment when she saw me sitting on the couch, waiting for her. "Everything okay?" she asked, setting down her shopping bags. "Fine," I replied. "Just wanted to hear more about this plumber. He must have been good if you're this impressed." Her laugh was forced. "He was fine, Mark. Just doing his job." But her voice betrayed her. There was something she wasn't telling me. And I knew I wouldn't rest until I found out what it was. The week wore on, and life resumed its usual rhythm, or so it seemed on the surface. Beth busied herself with the kids, chores, and errands, but something about her felt different. It wasn't overt, but it was there, subtle shifts in her behavior that gnawed at my instincts. She started taking her phone everywhere, even to the bathroom, a habit she'd never had before. When she texted, she angled the screen away from me. And though she was as attentive as ever with the kids, her interactions with me were diluted. She'd laugh at my jokes, but the laughter lacked its usual warmth. She'd kiss me goodnight, but her lips lingered less. It was like living with a ghost of the woman I knew. I tried to dismiss my suspicions. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But doubt has a way of growing, feeding on silence and secrecy. One evening, as Beth washed dishes in the kitchen, I brought it up, my tone as casual as I could manage. "You've been glued to your phone lately," I said, leaning against the counter. She glanced over her shoulder, her smile tight. "Just keeping up with friends. Lisa's been texting me a lot since the party." That made sense. Lisa was her closest friend, and they were constantly in touch. But it still didn't explain everything. "Anything exciting?" I asked, feigning curiosity. Beth shrugged, turning back to the sink. "Nothing worth mentioning. Just gossip." Her answer was vague, too vague. My mind jumped back to that party, to the way her eyes had sparkled when she thought I might indulge in their key-swapping game. I couldn't help but wonder, had that night planted a seed? As the days passed, I began paying closer attention. Patterns emerged. Beth's phone would buzz late at night, and she'd leave the room to take the call. She started running errands more often, sometimes twice in one day, even when the fridge was full, and the pantry stocked. Then there was the plumber. I found his business card tucked into the corner of the fridge door one evening. Mitch's Plumbing Services, it read, accompanied by a handwritten number. I turned the card over in my hands, staring at the bold, blocky font. Why hadn't Beth thrown it out? That night, as Beth slept beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about Mitch. He was the missing piece, the scratch on the floor, the ghost in our bathroom mirror. And I was determined to find out what role he played in this unsettling puzzle. The next morning, as Beth dropped the kids off at school, I found myself dialing the number on the card. My heart thudded in my chest as the line rang. Mitch's Plumbing, a man's voice answered, gruff but polite. Yes, hi, I began, forcing calm into my tone. This is Mark Johnson. You worked on our bathroom last week. I just wanted to ask a few questions. Sure thing, Mitch replied. Everything holding up okay? It's fine, I said. I just wanted to confirm, how long were you here? Mitch hesitated, as though the question caught him off guard. Couple hours, maybe 3. Your wife was real thorough about what she wanted fixed. I frowned. 3 hours for a single leaky pipe. Did she stay with you the whole time? I asked. She checked in now and then, Mitch said, his tone guarded. Why do you ask? No reason, I replied quickly. Thanks for your time. I hung up, the phone still warm in my hand. Mitch's answers weren't damning, but they didn't sit right, either. Beth's behavior. Mitch's lingering presence. The strange air that had settled over our home. I didn't have concrete proof yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Something had happened in this house. And Beth wasn't telling me the whole story. The tension in our home was becoming unbearable, though Beth seemed oblivious to it, or perhaps she was just pretending not to notice. I found myself analyzing her every move, every word, every fleeting expression. I wanted to believe her, to trust the woman I had built my life with, but the pieces weren't fitting. A few days later, as she went out for yet another errand, I decided it was time to take a more direct approach. I returned to the bathroom, determined to uncover whatever clue might confirm or dispel my suspicions. The place was spotless, as it had been since Mitch's visit. But the meticulous cleanliness now felt like a mask, hiding something beneath its surface. I examined every inch of the room, pulling open drawers, inspecting the tile grout, even checking the ventilation fan. It wasn't until I opened the cabinet under the sink that I found something unusual, a single red hair stuck to the base of the cabinet door. Beth's hair was brown. I stared at the hair for a long moment, the tiny, crimson strand igniting a firestorm of doubt. I told myself it could belong to anyone, a friend, perhaps, or even Mitch himself. But it was enough to make my stomach churn. Later that evening, as we sat at the dinner table with the kids, I tried to gauge Beth's mood. She seemed cheerful, laughing with Natalie and helping Emma with her math homework. To anyone else, she would have appeared perfectly normal. But I couldn't stop seeing the red hair. After the kids went to bed, I confronted her. Beth, I began, my voice low to avoid waking the children, I need to ask you something. She looked up from the book she was reading, her expression curious but wary. What's wrong? Was Mitch here for 3 hours when he worked on the bathroom? She blinked, caught off guard by the question. I don't know, maybe. Why? 3 hours seems like a long time for a simple repair, don't you think? Beth's gaze hardened. What are you getting at, Mark? I'm just asking, I said, holding her gaze. Was there anything else going on while he was here? Her cheeks flushed, a mixture of irritation and embarrassment crossing her face. No, of course not. Why would you even ask that? Because things haven't felt right between us, I replied, my voice firm but calm. You've been distant, taking calls in private, running extra errands. It's like there's something you're not telling me. Beth's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might snap. But then, she softened, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mark, I love you, she said, her voice trembling. I've been stressed lately, but it's nothing to do with us, or with Mitch. I swear. Her words were convincing, but the red hair loomed large in my mind, a silent accusation that her reassurance couldn't erase. I wanted to believe her. But something inside me wouldn't let me. That night, as Beth slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The cracks in our life were growing wider, and I was starting to see a version of my wife I didn't recognize. Who was Beth when I wasn't looking? And how far had she already drifted from the woman I thought I knew? I didn't know the answers yet. But I was determined to find out. The following morning, I took a calculated step. While Beth was busy with the kids, I called Mitch again. This time, my approach was less direct. "Mitch," I started, my tone casual, "sorry to bother you again. I've just been thinking about the work you did. Could you remind me of the exact repairs?" There was a slight pause before he responded. "Sure. Fixed the leak under the sink, replaced a couple of old seals, and adjusted the water pressure in the shower. Pretty standard stuff." "Got it," I said, hesitating before asking the next question. "Did Beth stick around while you worked? She mentioned she was watching closely." Mitch chuckled nervously. Yeah, she checked in now and then. Seemed curious about what I was doing. Nice lady. Real friendly. Friendly. The word lingered in the air, heavy with implication. "Well, thanks again," I said quickly, ending the call. I was no closer to clarity, but something about Mitch's tone rubbed me the wrong way. Friendly. Curious. Words that shouldn't have bothered me but did. Later that day, I decided to check our home's security camera footage. We'd installed a doorbell camera years ago, mostly as a precaution when Beth was home alone with the kids. I rarely reviewed it, but now, it felt like a lifeline. I scrolled through the feed from the day Mitch had been at the house. The footage started as expected, Beth opening the door to a tall man in his late 30s or early 40s, carrying a toolbox. Mitch was every bit the handyman stereotype, from his rugged demeanor to his easy smile. For the first hour, everything seemed routine. He entered and exited the house a few times, presumably to grab tools or parts from his truck. Beth appeared occasionally, bringing him water or chatting briefly. But as I fast-forwarded through the footage, something changed. About 2 hours in, Mitch stepped out of the house, followed by Beth. They stood on the front porch, talking. The conversation seemed animated, with Beth gesturing toward the truck. Mitch laughed, his body language relaxed, leaning slightly toward her. Then, to my shock, Beth reached out and touched his arm. It wasn't an overtly romantic gesture, more of a friendly pat, but it sent a jolt of anger through me nonetheless. I continued watching as Mitch returned inside, Beth following close behind. The two disappeared from the camera's view, leaving the house silent for the remaining hour. When the footage finally showed Mitch leaving, Beth stood at the door, waving goodbye with a smile that seemed far too warm. I leaned back in my chair, my hands trembling. While nothing in the footage was definitive, the sight of Beth touching Mitch, the way she lingered at the door, and the hour they'd spent out of view, it all added up to a nagging suspicion I couldn't ignore. That evening, I confronted her again. "Beth," I said, my voice even, "do you remember talking with Mitch on the porch?" She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. "What do you mean? The doorbell camera caught you too. You seemed pretty comfortable with him." Her eyes darted away, her cheeks flushing. "I was just being polite, Mark. He was doing a good job, and we talked for a bit. That's all." "Why did you touch his arm?" Beth's mouth opened and closed, her face a mask of indignation. "Are you seriously accusing me of something?" "I was thanking him, Mark. For fixing our bathroom." The conversation devolved into silence. She pushed her chair back abruptly, leaving the table and retreating to our bedroom. As I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me, the gap between us felt insurmountable. Beth wasn't telling me the truth. And I was running out of patience to wait for her to come clean. Beth was quieter the next few days, her usual warmth replaced by a careful distance. I mirrored her silence, both of us skirting around each other like strangers in our own home. Beneath the surface, my thoughts churned relentlessly. It was a Wednesday morning when I decided to search for answers on my own. Beth had taken the kids to the park, leaving me with a few hours of uninterrupted time. I returned to the bathroom, the scene of so much doubt, and began a thorough inspection. I checked every drawer, every crevice, and every corner for anything that might explain the growing divide between us. For a long while, there was nothing, just neatly organized toiletries and spotless surfaces. But then, tucked behind the vanity mirror, I found something that made my breath catch, a small receipt from a nearby cafe, dated the same day Mitch had been here. The name scrawled across the top was Mitch's. The receipt wasn't for tools or materials but for 2 coffees. 2. I stared at it, my mind racing. Mitch and Beth had gone for coffee together. When? Why? When Beth returned home later, her mood was lighter than it had been in days. She breezed through the door with the kids in tow, laughing at something Natalie had said. I waited until the kids were upstairs before I brought it up. I found something interesting today, I said, holding the receipt out to her. Beth froze, her laughter dying mid-breath. Her eyes darted to the receipt, then back to me. Where did you get that? It was behind the bathroom mirror. Care to explain why Mitch bought 2 coffees that day? Her face turned pale, the color draining from her cheeks. She hesitated, wringing her hands. It's not what you think, Mark. He asked if I wanted coffee while he was taking a break. I thought it was harmless. Harmless? I echoed, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. You went for coffee with the plumber? After inviting him into our home? Beth's eyes welled with tears. It wasn't a date, Mark. It was just coffee. I didn't think it would matter. Didn't think it would matter. I repeated, incredulous. Do you have any idea how this looks? Especially after everything that's been going on. Her tears spilled over, but she didn't deny it. She didn't try to comfort me, didn't offer the reassurances I so desperately needed. Instead, she simply said, "You're making this into something it's not." That night, as I lay awake in bed beside her, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling me the whole story. I felt trapped, caught between my love for the woman I'd married and the growing certainty that she had betrayed me in some way. I didn't know what hurt more, the suspicion itself or her refusal to dispel it. Either way, I couldn't ignore it any longer. Beth was hiding something. And it was only a matter of time before I found out what it was. By the end of the week, I was no closer to the truth, but the cracks in my resolve were beginning to show. Beth's insistence that I was blowing things out of proportion only deepened my conviction that there was more to this story than she admitted. I spent hours replaying the doorbell footage, scrutinizing every frame, every gesture. Beth's touch on Mitch's arm, her lingering smile, it gnawed at me. Then there was the cafe receipt. 2 coffees. 2. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, my mind spun dark scenarios I couldn't escape. I decided to confront Mitch one last time. If Beth wouldn't tell me the truth, maybe he would. On a cloudy Saturday morning, I drove to the address listed on his business card. Mitch's house was modest, a single-story bungalow with a well-worn truck parked out front. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I sat outside, summoning the courage to knock on his door. When Mitch opened it, he looked surprised to see me. "Mark, right?" he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "What brings you here?" "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice tense. "About Beth." Mitch's expression flickered, something between unease and recognition, but he quickly masked it. "Sure, come in." His living room was sparse but clean, with tools and work orders scattered across a small desk. He motioned for me to sit, but I remained standing. "Why did you go for coffee with my wife?" I asked, my tone sharp. Mitch sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, man, I didn't mean any disrespect. She offered to grab coffee while I was on a break, and I didn't see the harm." "You mean she offered?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. Well, Mitch admitted, I might have suggested it first, but it wasn't anything inappropriate. Just two people talking over coffee. And that's all it was? I pressed. He hesitated, and in that moment, I saw the truth flicker across his face. Mitch, I said, my voice low and dangerous, if you don't tell me everything right now, I'll make sure you regret it. His shoulders slumped, and he looked away. Fine. Look, we talked, all right? She seemed lonely. Said you'd been distant lately. I told her she was a beautiful woman and that you were lucky to have her. My heart pounded in my chest. Did anything happen? No, Mitch said quickly, raising his hands. I swear, man. Nothing happened. She didn't even let me hug her. She liked the attention. That's all. I stared at him, my fists clenching at my sides. His words felt like a gut punch, confirming my worst fear, not that she had physically cheated, but that she had sought validation from another man. She wanted attention. I repeated, my voice trembling. Mitch nodded, his expression filled with regret. I think she misses feeling special. But I'm telling you, nothing happened. I didn't know whether to believe him, but his words left me reeling. I turned and left without another word, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. Driving home, I felt a heavy weight pressing down on me. Beth hadn't crossed the line physically, but emotionally. She'd stepped over it, leaving me behind. That night, I didn't confront her. I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to decide what this meant for us, for our marriage, our family, and the life we had built together. Because the truth, as painful as it was, had finally come to light. And I wasn't sure if I could live with it. The house was quiet when I returned that night, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Beth was upstairs, putting the kids to bed, her voice soft as she read Emma's favorite bedtime story. It should have been a comforting sound, but instead, it felt like a cruel reminder of what I might lose. I waited until she came downstairs, her steps light as she entered the living room. She paused when she saw me sitting on the couch, her smile faltering at the look on my face. Mark, she began cautiously, is everything okay? No, I said, my voice steady but strained. We need to talk. Beth's face hardened, as if bracing herself for an argument. What now? I went to see Mitch. Her eyes widened briefly, but she quickly recovered. You what? I asked him about the coffee, I continued, watching her reaction carefully. He told me everything. Beth's expression shifted, her shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. She sank into the armchair opposite me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Mark, Don't lie to me, Beth, I said, cutting her off. I deserve the truth. She took a deep, shaky breath, her eyes glistening with tears. I didn't cheat on you, she said softly. I swear. But I wasn't honest either. Go on, I said, my voice cold. Beth hesitated, her gaze fixed on the floor. When Mitch was here, he was kind. Attentive. He noticed things about me, small things. He complimented my hair, my dress. He made me feel seen. And I don't. I asked, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. It's not that, she said quickly, her voice breaking. You're a wonderful husband, Mark. But after 3 kids and 10 years of marriage, I've felt invisible. Like I'm just a mom, just a wife. Mitch didn't do anything wrong. He just reminded me of what it feels like to be admired. I stared at her, the pain in her confession cutting deeper than I expected. So you went out for coffee with him? Behind my back. It was a stupid mistake, Beth admitted, tears streaming down her face now. I knew it was wrong, but I told myself it didn't matter because it wasn't physical. But I realize now how much it hurt you. I'm so sorry, Mark. I love you. I've always loved you. Her words hung in the air, a plea and an apology wrapped in desperation. For a long moment, I said nothing. My mind replayed every memory, every gesture, every crack that had formed in our marriage over the past weeks. Finally, I spoke. You didn't cheat, but you broke my trust, Beth. That's not something I can easily forgive. I'll do anything to fix this, she said, her voice trembling. I'll go to counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Please, Mark. Don't give up on us. I looked into her tear-filled eyes, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability behind her actions. She wasn't trying to hurt me, she was trying to fill a void within herself. But that didn't erase the pain she'd caused. I need time, I said finally, standing. Time to think, time to decide what this means for us. For me. Beth nodded, her expression crumbling. Take all the time you need. Just, please don't give up on us. As I walked upstairs and closed the door behind me, I felt a mixture of relief and devastation. The truth had been revealed, but the path forward was still unclear. Could I forgive her? Could I trust her again? I didn't know the answers yet. All I knew was that our marriage would never be the same. Thank you for watching to the end. Write in the comments what you liked and what you would like to see next.